Good evening, everybody. Welcome to tonight's Kettering Borough Council Planning Committee. Welcome to councillors, members and officers, or members watching, members of the public watching us on YouTube, should I say. Please note that this is a virtual meeting using Zoom, so please do be patient if we experience any technical difficulties this evening. We'll do our very best to get that resolved as quickly as we can, and just ask for people's patience with any things that may happen this evening. And I'll make it clear that I will call all speakers by their names. That includes councillors, officers and public speakers where applicable. And I will now run through the protocol with which we will conduct each item this evening. So we'll firstly have a chair officers update. We'll have the officers report where the screen will be shared and they will carry their presentation. We'll then hear from our speakers in order present on the speakers list. We'll go to members' debate, where members get a chance to debate each application. I will then state the officer's recommendation to be voted upon. We'll seek a proposer and seconder, after which Anne will conduct a vote and each member will state whether they're for, against or abstain the application, after which we have reached a decision. I will state that decision and we'll move to the next item. So firstly, can I turn to Anne, please, to conduct a register of everyone attending this evening? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll read out everyone's name. If you could indicate by saying present. Thank you. Councillor Ash Davis, Chair.
Present.
Councillor Linda Adams.
Present.
Councillor Clark Mitchell.
Present.
Councillor Mark Rowley.
Present.
Councillor Leslie Thurland.
Present.
Councillor Greg Titcombe.
Present.
Councillor Scott Edwards.
Present.
Councillor Jan O'Hara.
Present.
We also have officers in attendance: Emma Granger, James Wilson and Richard Marlowe. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. Anne, do you have any apologies, please?
We've received apologies, Chair, from Councillor Shirley Stanton. Councillor Edwards is acting as a substitute.
Thanks for that, Anne. Members, do we have any declaration of interest, please? If you could state that now. Okay, no declaration of interest. Thank you very much. So we turn to our minutes of our meeting on the 25th of August 2020. Is everyone happy to sign that as a true record as read in the agenda papers?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you very much. I will sign that shortly. I have no urgent items. So that moves us to our speakers list this evening. And we do only have one speaker on item 5.3 KET 2020-0467 Naseby Hotel, Sheep Street in Kettering. That is Matt Humphreys, who is the agent for the applicant. He'll be joining us by video. And therefore I've asked the planning officer if we can hear that presentation first. That decides the order. Item 5.3 and then item 5.1. No further speakers. And just for everyone's reference, item 5.2 has been withdrawn and should be seen back at a future committee meeting.
Through you, Chair, as the speaker has yet to arrive, you might want to switch the order back into 5.1.
Let's do that. Yeah, I think we'll give him more time to do that. Richard, are you happy to do 5.1 now instead, just based on the speaker not being ready there? Thank you very much indeed. So we move, as confirmed there, to item 5.1, KET 2020-0014, 44 Montague Street in Kettering. And I don't believe there is an update on that one. So David is now going to share his screen for the presentation. Just bear with us one moment there. Brilliant. So that is good to go, Richard, when you're ready.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This is an application at 44 Montague Street, Kettering. It's an application for a 3-storey side extension, 2-storey rear extension, which will create 15 1- and 2-bedroom apartments and an enlargement of the existing retail unit on the ground floor. Next slide, please, David.
Can you see the whole screen there? Or just the
with
right.
The side panel on PowerPoint. So yeah, it's not the full.
Because the speaker just turned up and he's thrown my screen share out. 1 second, he's still in the way.
No problem.
He doesn't want to go full screen. Apologies for this, Chair.
No problem. We'll just wait for David to fix the slideshow there, Richard. So just bear with us.
Come on.
There we go. That looks good to me, David.
Perfect.
Great. Ready to go. You are, Richard.
Thank you, David. So this is obviously the location plan of the site set to the south of Montague Street. You can see the former public house there on the left-hand side of the site itself. And to the right is the current car park where the extension will be going. Next slide, please. So on the right-hand side there, you can see this proposed site plan. And in the central plan of that image, the area in green is showing the proposal in its full extent, and to the left is showing the existing site as it is at present. So you see we've got a sort of built form that's almost sort of doubling the size of the existing element built form on the site across that vacant car park to the east of the site. It's important to point out, it's covered in the officer report, but as is clear on this slide, that all 15 units proposed accord with space standards. Next slide, please. So these are the existing elevations of the building, the former public house. Next slide, please, David. So this is the proposal itself. So we're looking at a three-storey building, but with the top floor in the roof of the building itself. So visually sort of appearing as a two-storey building with rooms in the roof. That's obviously on the sort of western side of the site, and then wrapping round to the rear of the site, there's that two-storey element as the extension to the back. Looking to the eastern side, so that's the bottom left diagram on that slide. That's showing obviously in the sort of foreground the extension at ground floor level to the retail unit, with obviously the three-storey element behind. And then the bottom right image is the proposed front elevation. So there on the right-hand side of the image, we've got the existing building with its archway, which is important because that provides the access through to the bin storage and cycle provision, which I'll touch on later on in the presentation. But you can see obviously to the left-hand side of that image is the new built form there. So it's following a sort of consistent design approach and architectural detailing there, but it's sort of stepping down to step down that gap between the existing property on the right-hand side and the neighbouring property to the left of that image. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed floor plans of the site. On the left-hand image, I've used my now famous coloured dots. So we've got the blue coloured dot is the bin store for residents. The green dot is the cycle storage, and the orange dot is the bin provision for the retail unit itself. The access through to the bin stores is through those double doors from the former public house through to access those bin stores as they're provided there to that west of the site. You'll see in the officer report that we've had confirmation via private collector that they would be happy to actually collect the bins from those stores themselves, because this wouldn't be an arrangement which the council would normally undertake. But we've got that confirmation through the application, but it's also in the refuse condition on the scheme itself to ensure that those bins are able to be collected from those stores themselves. So we've got on the ground floor, you can see we've got that enhanced retail unit on the ground floor, taking up the majority of the site, with obviously sort of servicing to the rear of that unit. And then on the first floor, we've got some of the apartments there, which obviously, like I say, they accord with space standards and provide acceptable amenity for those future occupiers. Next slide, please. So this is looking at the top floor So the second floor of the unit itself, so the remaining apartments there, you can see the floor plan of. You can see on the right hand side there's a roof plan showing the large number of roof windows and providing light and improving amenity for those future occupiers. That's going to be a flat roof, that element. So you'll see that the officers covered it in the report, and we've got a condition to ensure that that's not used in any form as a sort of terrace or balcony or any sort of no actual activity on that roof itself. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I thought I'd just pull out the heads of terms was it's reported to committee because of the section 106 and the concerns from highways. So the heads of terms are looking at a contribution towards early years education, libraries, because there's only limited amenity space, contributions towards town centre provisions that are identified in the area action plan, £50,000 contribution to affordable housing, primary healthcare contribution, and also some travel plan initiatives. So we've got a 28-day provision of a mega rider, stagecoach ticket, and a cycle voucher of £100 per residential unit to try and encourage sustainable modal shift on the site. Next slide, please. So this is the site itself. So we've got the site in the sort of left-hand side of that image there, with the private car park separating that from the restaurant uses and more commercial elements running along to the west on Montague Street. Next slide, please. So this is the private car park, which is adjacent to the site and which will remain obviously through this proposal. It's obviously highlighted in the report about how that provision is there obviously for residents to use, but obviously that is something that's privately owned. But it obviously, in the report, concerns have been raised from highways about the scheme and the lack of parking provision. It is obviously a town centre location, as is covered in the report by the officer. Then the National Planning Policy Framework talks more about a sort of site-specific approach rather than looking at blanket parking requirements in each site. So given this is a town centre location, right in the heart of the town centre, that lack of parking is not considered sort of determinative on this scheme, albeit that there is obviously that private car park next to it. There's obviously the public car park on School Lane. And in obviously normal circumstances, there is the parking provision on Montague Street itself in the evenings and the weekends. But obviously at the moment, that's not there because of the bollarding that's been undertaken for obviously to provide access into the town centre as some of the sort of green transport initiatives currently due to the COVID crisis. Next slide, please. So this is the left-hand side of the site. So it's the east of the site. So this is where that built form would be built, and that's where I've sort of highlighted how that there would be the stepping down from this unit on the right-hand side through to that cafe use on the left-hand side there. And it's important to probably point out in that sort of mid-ground, the sort of darker bricked building at first floor are numbers 6A to D of Victoria Street. They're the nearest residential occupiers to the proposal, but they would be, as covered in the report, 10 metres from the nearest point of this proposal, and therefore a sufficient distance to maintain acceptable future amenity for occupiers. Next slide, please. So yes, this is the existing elevation of that building that is in some need of repair. Next slide, please. That's just obviously looking down the street. You see the imposing form of public house on this site and how it relates to the street scene and the importance of that sort of stepping down in the built form as we run across the site. Next slide, please. So I'd leave it there on the proposed elevations. As is covered in the report, it's reported to committee because of the section 106, a requirement which I've obviously detailed there in heads of term, but also obviously the concerns from the Highways Authority. Overall, officers consider it's an acceptable scheme and therefore recommending it for approval subject to those conditions set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
you very much indeed for that. Richard?
Councillor Furland, Chair.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. It's a very good presentation again. I've got a number of concerns. Originally, the scheme was for 21 one-bed apartments, which I assumed would be 21 people. But now we've got 15 flats made up of 3 2-beds and 12 one-beds, which is giving us 21 people anyway. So I'm not sure where the benefit of reducing it from 21 to 15 comes out. Planning policy says we've got to look for sustainable development and promote healthy and safe communities. There's no amenity space here, and I know it says it is unlikely that this development would attract families, but 1 2-bedroom flats attract small families, and the intimation that we can use Meadow Road amenity space, I don't think that's a particularly viable alternative. There's a new national minimum standard, I understand, for 1-bed flat with a shower should be a minimum of 37 square metres. If we're not working to that, what criteria are we working at? And it's really difficult to get the clear details on the on our notes, but I did try and look on the computer as well, and I found one of the 1-bed flats, I think it's labelled as 43 square metres, but scaling off the internal dimensions, it appears to be only 33 square metres. And the one of the 2-bed flats, squaring that off, I make it 58 as opposed to the 68, which I think it says on the papers. I'd like to confirm what the measurements are, what our space standards, what we're working to, and what these measurements are actually on the application. Page 26 refers to a communal laundry, and I can't see what type of appliances. Are we having just washers or dryers? And are they going to be free to use? Because running a tumble dryer is really expensive. And if people don't use a tumble dryer, they tend to dry their clothes indoors, and they're going to have to because there's no outdoor clothes drying facilities on this, which is going to lead to damp and mould, which is very prevalent in this type of building. And I'm very well aware that we have to look on every application as an individual one on their own merit, but surely we can learn from experience. Now, we had, and I'm sure my colleagues will remember, we had the Newland Street flats, and they've got retail premises underneath the flats. They have not been utilised in some 3 or 4 years. I don't believe that there's compelling evidence that these are going to be any different. And if members remember that the same parking arguments were used as planning reasons to ignore the highways objections on Newland Street, but we're having real terrible problems with parking in Zone E because there's not enough spaces for local residents and car owners living in the flats. And I know the report says on page 27, it refers to the 46 space private car park, which has sufficient space available to cope with the proposal. But this is really irrelevant because earlier in the application, it's intimated that car parking won't be required as local transport can be used. So I can't see, I think that's a bit of a contradiction in terms. In my opinion, I don't see this as a polite, high quality development, and policy 8 of the JCS seeks good quality of life for existing and future users. And the NPPF, and I know we quote all these policies, but it says we should be looking for sustainable development with quality homes for our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor. Richard, did you want to respond on those?
Yeah, I've tried to make notes there, Chair, so I'll try and come back on as many of those points as I can. On the sort of first point about the 21 beds, obviously the change of the down to the obviously the 15 units that are proposed. Obviously, the number of people sort of generated from the individual flats is obviously different. I think the concern would obviously be the reason that obviously that it's down to the 15 apartments is obviously because they do accord with space standards, and that'll obviously touch on another point, the second point that you raised, that there's obviously only a limit in the building of this size of the number of and the units that are achievable, that are of appropriate standard to meet acceptable amenity levels, and across the site it's only felt that obviously 15 can be achieved, with obviously some of those being sort of doubles. That sort of links into your concerns about the space standards. It's we use the nationally described space standards, which is the same space standards we've been referring to since 2015. The space standards set out obviously the thresholds for different units sizes, ranging right from 1 bed, 1 person flats or apartments, which you correctly reference at 37 square metres, going right up to 4 and 5 bed proposals. The officers have obviously checked those measurements, because that's one of the obviously things we're concerned about, and they're content that obviously it does meet the space standards. The space standards themselves obviously include the entire space within the unit, so circulation space within the unit as well, not just purely the individual rooms. And if you look at the actual nationally described space standards, there's even requirements set out for the area that can be included for built-in storage, and what can be included where there's sort of rooms in roofs. So for example, only rooms where they're above 1.5 metres headroom, only that part of a bedroom could be included within the space standards. So there's a number of sort of technical stipulations that can be used in the sort of methodology for calculating the space standards, but officers have been through that assessment on this scheme and are content that obviously all the 15 units do meet those space standards, and that's obviously what gives us the comfort that the future.
Sorry, Richard, so you're telling me that all those rooms are 37 square metres then? From the, I know what you're saying when you've got rooms in roofs, because what do you use, etc., because you can't use the bit where it's, I do understand that, but the measurements on here, can you tell me then what these measurements are? Because I can't read them, and I can't read, if you scale up on their scale that they're using, because I can't even read, it's very difficult even on a big screen, what these square metres are supposed to be, what the square meterage of these units is.
Do you need some time, Richard, to confirm those measurements? In which case,
no, that's fine. I can read them all out, but they're all on that sort of third slide that I included. So we've got apartment 1, which is a gross, gross.
1, 2. So what do you say that one is?
Apartment 1 is 68 square metres. Apartment 2 is 62. Apartment 3, 68. Apartment 4, 43. Apartment 5, 40. 6 is 40 square metres. 7 is 40. Apartment 8 is 43 square metres.
So you're telling me all these, if you measure those with a scale rule, they measure all that? Because it's really, you do.
Yeah, I haven't. I don't have the ability to measure them all now, sitting here. But yeah, officers would have gone through the report and obviously looked at the space standards, because the space stands in 2 elements. There's obviously the overall numbers, and the reason they've included the bedroom sizes as well, because there's the space standards breaks it down to individual size requirements for individual bedrooms.
The space standards we're talking about, which is the new one, which is 37 square metres for rooms with a shower and 39 square metres with. So that meets all these then.
Yes, it does.
Meet all this new one.
Yes, it's the same. I don't know whether something's been released in the press, but it's the same space standards. The nationally described space standards were released by the government in 2015.
Yes, it's on the website. Yeah, I'm just looking at on the website.
Yeah, and it's those that through the you can only use the space standards locally, where you have a local policy to hang that detail off.
And do we have that?
Yeah, and with the adoption of the Joint Core Strategy in 2016, it was from that point that we've obviously been able to use the nationally described space standards within determinations. So there was a bit of a period from sort of mid to late 2015, whenever that document came out, and the adoption of the Joint Core Strategy in summer 16, when we weren't able to use those space standards. But all those space standards that we've referred to since summer 2016 have always been those same nationally described space standards. Yeah,
I'd like, perhaps I think James might be able to want to answer me as well on that one. Thank you.
And then the other element, sorry, the communal laundry. I'm not clear what type of appliances would be in there, because that would obviously be up to the occupier. Sorry, the fourth point was about the retail premise. I'm looking at my notes. Sorry, the retail premise on the ground floor. This obviously links in to probably what should have covered in the report. It's obviously the national changes to the use classes order that came about from the 1st of September, where rather than the historic sort of A use classes, so a retail unit being an A1 use, financial services being A2.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm just thinking we haven't let the ones in Newland Street.
No.
Why would these be any different? And I just feel that we're going to be left with Kettering being a huge mass of room only people instead of homes for people. But that's my opinion. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Chair, if I just come back on the so in relation to measuring the space standards, that needs to be done on the relevant scale. So you can only measure these specific space standards at A1 size. So unless you've got an A1 size plan, you can't scale them off on a ruler and come up with the calculation. And officers will have had those plans. I mean, we are struggling in relation to how to do this virtually, via computers, because that doesn't scale the plans properly either.
So that scale on the right, James, is nothing to do with what the plans are then, because there is a scale that they're using. This is the scale that we're meant to be judging this on, I thought.
Well, you have to do it from proper scale ruler and a proper plan at A1, but you have to have the plan at size A1. You can't do it off an A4 size plan. So
we can't check that. Oh no, I appreciate what you're saying, James. It's just the curtailing what we can check then with the stuff we've got.
Yeah, I think in terms of whether the officers will have checked that as Richard has said, and it is set out that they do meet it by the applicant, and if that's not the case, then clearly we can go back and double check that before we issue the decision notice, if that's the way members wish to go. But I'm confident that it would be within the space standards. I mean, I think the issue in relation to commercial uses in combination with flats and residential units, we have to take a balance. We do want to encourage the reuse of buildings. This building has been vacant, I think, and that there is a good opportunity to reuse it, and flatted development is probably the best way to go forward. And having higher densities in town centres is what the government's encouraging, especially where it's close to transportation hubs. We will have to take a view, and I know that members are concerned about parking in town centre areas, but I think we have to take a view on a case-by-case basis to see whether or not these type of developments are going to cause those issues. And on balance, I think on this one, the officers have come up and said, that the benefits are going to potentially outweigh some of those issues that might occur. In general, I think where flats are utilised, and the predominant number are one-bedroom flats, there tends to be less vehicular ownership, but we can't say for sure who's going to be in them, and whether or not they will have one car, two cars, or
that's why we go by experience. Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, James. We don't know, and we have no more than we should know.
Thanks for that, James. I'm going to call Councillor Edwards now, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just to go back on James, and I appreciate what you're saying actually about using old buildings, but it comes to a point when you're just cramming as many people as you can into an old building where it's just not right, and this is what seems to be happening. And I concur with what Councillor Thurland just said about it's very low quality bedrooms. Basically, they're not homes. And I just don't think it's right that we should be doing this. So on the parking issue, There is no parking basically whatsoever. I understand you saying there's a private car park next to it, and I understand there is a private or council-owned car park behind it. Both of those are going to be paid for, so you're going to have to pay to park there. Now, who in reality is going to pay to park in those car parks? Very few will, and all that you're going to do is push it into streets like Eden Street, which is very close by, which currently has a problem with parking anyway, and you're just going to push it all down to the residential streets. There's also the point that the NCC raised about disabled parking. Yes, they could park in the private car park, as it says, but what happens in 12 months' time when somebody wants to build on that car park? There is nowhere for them to go. And I have real concerns that we are pushing people into town centre buildings where they have no room to move whatsoever. On a one positive note, I do like the idea of them encouraging them with the £100 cycle voucher and the bus voucher. I just want to ask though, is that per person or per residence? Because if it's per residence, what happens to the second person? So yeah, if you could come back to me on that, that'd be great.
Thanks for that, Councillor.
Sorry, through you, Chair. Councillor Morton's just arrived, so I'm going to invite him in and advise him that he won't be taking part in this.
He'll have to abstain on this item. Thanks, David. Richard or James, did you want to come back on Councillor Edwards' point there?
I'm just trying to look it up.
Well, Richard's, can I just make a general point then in relation to schemes which are consented under, schemes which aren't consented but are allowed under permitted development rights in relation to office change of use. And what we're looking at here, which is a scheme which has gone through officer assessment and has been brought forward to you with a recommendation for approval. I don't think it's the same as the type of proposals which are in the planning press and in the national press, which are saying that it's sort of slums for the future and that there aren't proper space standards. So we have set out that they are proper space standards, and we'll check that if members were minded to approve it. I think things are changing in terms of the way people live, and I do take members' points in relation to having proper, sustainable and quality living conditions. But there is a sense that these type of developments where it's shared accommodation with other young professionals, it's happening in other cities. There's a gym, there's a restaurant, it starts people off on the property ladder. We've assessed that and feel that those proposals are within the government's guidelines around sustainable development.
Sorry, James, there's no gym or anything in this building we're talking about in Montague Street.
Oh, sorry, that's the second application, is it? Well, it's on the lines of the type of application within a town centre where those facilities can be accessed, and other facilities and other developments do have those kind of facilities within them. So that's all I'd say in relation to a general point. I think this is slightly different from a proposal which would be under permitted development that might not accord with because I think those issues are being addressed by government, and there's been a recognition that space standards and proper amenity for people in these types of accommodation has to be provided. So I'll say no more on that.
James. Richard.
Yeah, I've got the answer. Thank you, Chair. On page 22, it says that the provision of the 28-day mega ride stagecoach ticket is per residential unit.
Thanks for confirming that. Councillor Adams, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, obviously, I'm going to concur with a lot of things that my colleagues have already said, but I've got a couple of other points as well. it's very good to see the heads of terms and those positives that are in that document. But there are some disappointing aspects to this build as well, I feel. Only 2 affordable housing units are coming out of this build. I feel that is disappointing, because
appear to may have lost Councillor Adams, so we will await her return hopefully shortly. So I'm going to call Councillor O'Hara in the meantime.
Thank you, Chair. I think it's great to try and build a building, try and bring a building back into use, but this isn't appropriate. It is, given what we're going through at the minute in a COVID world, these are little more than rooms. To try and share any kind of area at the minute is an absolute no. You can't even go and visit your neighbours, never mind share facilities, share cooking facilities. I don't think anybody would want to live in what is essentially a one-bed sit. I don't think it concurs with what the government wants. They have a massive problem in terms of we're supposed to be building homes for a healthy future, and part of Policy 8 of JCS it is to build good quality future developments. These are not good quality developments at all, not on any scale. Like we've already said, you can't get, there's nowhere to go and dry clothes. You're going to end up with damp. You're going to end up with people with chest problems, with asthma. There's a whole plethora of things that are going to emanate from this. And I think you're also going to have a very transient population that come into these kind of houses, that they're not homes, absolutely not homes, not on any scale. The parking issue is something that may not be an issue, because I think the people that will own these that will live in these places won't be able to afford to have a car, never mind pay for parking. And my biggest concern is if they do have a car, you're on a main street, so the egress out of there is crazy. It's not a little back street, it's a main thoroughfare of Kettering. And I wouldn't want a family living on that thoroughfare either. So I think on every level, you can't take a view on it that, we'll let it be built and see what happens, see if there's any problems. You can't do that. You could not put a person into these kind of buildings. I've seen these buildings in our neighbouring areas. They charge £100 a week for a room. They share a kitchen, they share a bathroom. In a COVID world, that's just asking for trouble, and I don't want to be part of putting somebody in that kind of dilemma. So I don't think it fits with government policy. It certainly doesn't fit with Policy 8. It certainly doesn't fit with the Homes for the Future, the healthy living, which the government is pursuing and wants us to embrace. So I think on a number of levels, this development doesn't work. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Richard, did you want to respond on those points?
Yeah, I just wanted to get a couple of points clear. Previous councillor obviously raised about affordable housing, and I'm sure we'll touch on that on the next item as well. Just to be clear about, I didn't touch on it in the report, but the vacant building credit is relevant here. What that does is essentially says that it takes the gross area that is proposed in the new site, and it subtracts from that the existing area of built form, because obviously that doesn't currently provide any affordable housing. And it's then that net difference where the affordable housing is looked at. And that's the reason that there's obviously low or no provision on some of these schemes in the town centre, because of this vacant building credit, which is set out in the National Planning Policy Framework. Because obviously it's there to reference the fact that there's these existing buildings that could hypothetically be used for varying uses. Some of them could be residential, but they don't provide affordable housing at the minute, so that's sort of netted off the gross proposal. On the second point, I just wanted to make clear, because I'm hearing about shared facilities, I just want to make clear that we're not getting confused between the two schemes. This is pure apartments. These are standalone apartments, and this scheme self-contained with all the facilities you would expect in an apartment. There is the communal laundry, there is obviously the bin storage and the cycle storage, but these are self-contained apartments, so these are not sharing sort of kitchens or anything of that nature. So I just wanted to make clear that we were clear about what the nature of this proposal is before we move to recommendation.
Sorry, Chair, that was my error in terms of confusion there, so sorry about that.
Okay, no problem. So we have 3 people wishing to speak still. So obviously I'm going to call those plus Councillor Adams before everyone, just to finish up what she was going to say. And then obviously if we can be mindful that we have a recommendation for us to approve. And obviously I'm keen to move that forward after we've had the debate. So give some thought if members were wishing to go against that. So I'm going to call Councillor Adams to finish off your point. We lost you there, Councillor, about halfway through your point. So I don't know if you want to start from the top and restate what you wanted to say there.
Well, I heard the response to the affordable housing. I was just talking about the bins and whether that was sustainable, being a private enterprise, and was it for the full life of the building? I mean, really, the other thing, obviously, I'm going to talk about is the car parking, because it's a thing that I've heard on so many occasions now, and there's so much planning gone into our town centre. And you know, I'm going to raise again, when do we realise that we've reached soaking point, that our public car parks, even our borough council car parks, just can't take this amount of cars, even if people were willing to pay? And I'm not sure whether that is looked at all. I understand we have to take each planning plan as planning permission for it as an individual, but I do also think we need to look at the bigger picture at the same time when we're talking about such a small area as our town centre. And I understand what James said about case to case and taking a view on each case, but there is a massive cumulative effect. And I just feel, again, that constantly we're squashing so many individuals into very small living spaces with no amenity space. And I just feel that the word that sums it up is, it's felt that this is an acceptable development. And I think it's all in that word acceptable. It's not great, it's not shining, it's not anything that I think that Kettering could wave a flag above and say, come and look at the beautiful developments that we're making in our town centre. And, you know, to be extremely blunt, I suppose, it's just not high quality. It really isn't. And if you're talking about a shared laundrette and a shared way of washing your clothes, I don't see that it's going to attract high quality residents. I just don't see it. I don't get it. It is what it is. It's 1-bedroom apartments or flats. They're not even apartments. They're 1-bedroom minimum flats to squash as many people into as we possibly can, with absolutely no amenity space, a way of taking fresh air in at all. And I think if you look at our policy frameworks and stuff, we talk about vitality, building a strong, sustainable, promoting healthy and safe communities. And I just don't think all these builds do that. So that's the way I'm feeling.
Thank you for that. Councillor, does an officer wish to respond on Councillor Adams' points there at all? Okay, so Councillor, did you want to speak, Richard, there?
Yes, thanks, Chair. Yeah, just touching on, in particular, obviously the bin provision. That's obviously covered in the condition, and the condition specific to say that we need to have details about that secures that obviously those bins are collected from that bin storage area, because as a reference in the presentation, it's not an arrangement that the Borough Council would undertake to collect those from that area. So we've seen documentation that says that from a contractor that says that they can achieve that, and the condition number 11, page 17 of the report, specifically says, sort of second and third line down, including the collection of bins from the storage area within the site by the refuse collector. So that is referenced through that condition.
Thanks for confirming that. So we've got Councillor Titcombe and then Councillor O'Hara who wish to speak. Then we'll look to move this forward. So Councillor Titcombe, please.
Thank you, Chair. You'll be pleased to know I don't have too much to add to that, of what's all gone before with our colleagues. I'll just add that I agree also with the local highway authority, which is unusual. One concern which nobody's raised yet is we are looking at this development as we've got to try it to see what happens. My question is, what do we do if we find out we are wrong? Because there don't seem to be any wriggle room there on that point. I don't expect an answer tonight because it's going up, because we don't have an answer. But I don't see that we'll have to actually get a cure for it if it is wrong. Thank you, Chair. Well, just to add that I am against it. Thank you, Chair.
Richard, did you want to respond on his point there?
Yeah, obviously, should the application be approved this evening, obviously those enforcement powers, should sort of conditions or whatever be not adhered to. But obviously, yes, if the principle or the nature of the building is accepted, then obviously that's its lawful use, and then we wouldn't be able to then go back and change it at a later date unless an applicant or somebody sought to change or revise the scheme at a later date.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor O'Hara, please.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, Councillor Tickham's asked what I wanted to ask, that if there are people that are moving, it then becomes a problem. What then happens to the building? Because, like you just said, there's no jurisdiction over it. To cram people into these small living spaces, it's nothing worse than having a zoo open, to be quite frank. It just won't work. So, thank you for that, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Thurland, before I move this forward, did I see your hand raised?
I did. All I was going to point out was how many cycle spaces we've got compared to how many, but I think everything else going, I think that's going to be immaterial, Chair.
Thank you for that. So we've had quite a robust debate. Everyone's had their say. As far as I know, no one else wishing to speak. So we have an officer's recommendation to approve the application. And obviously I'm mindful of people's comments and obviously points raised. So clearly if we were minded to go against that, we'd need concrete reasons, material reasons, and proposed and seconded amendment. So this is the opportunity to have your say.
Could we go for overdevelopment? It's against the policy of good standard of living and against the highways. I'm not too sure if somebody else can help me with the wording.
May I ask that we cite policy 8, that we don't see that it's good quality for future development, nor does it adhere to the government's Homes for the Future for Healthy Living. I think that they're two that actually point to the kind of developments we'd like to see people living in, to make them into a home, not just a box to exist in. And I think on those 2 points alone would be enough to move towards a vote to refuse along those lines, and of course include highways. And latterly, although we're not a planning consideration, is the fact that that they're not even big enough to have laundry space. And given a COVID world, we should not be promoting something like that. And as I say, the highways position as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Anyone else wishing to add anything? That includes perhaps officers who may wish to advise.
Well, I think members have got to decide what the reasons for refusal are. We've set out in the committee report that it does meet space standards, so it'd be difficult to argue, I think, that somebody can't actually live within residential amenity that is provided for nationally. That there could be reasons around highways in relation to parking if it's not demonstrated but that might be tenuous in relation to the location. And this is the difficulty I think officers have considered. While I think one of the members said that this is only sort of acceptable, if it is acceptable within policy terms, then officers sometimes have to recommend, where it might not be the highest quality, have to recommend an approval based on an assessment that it meets national and local planning policy.
Are we saying it's not meeting policy 8? I mean, we've often said this, isn't it? It's different opinions. One might think it's acceptable on policy 8, and the other one might not think it is. And I think that's what we're saying tonight. We, council, don't.
Yeah, and that's fine. I think you need to be clear in terms of what elements in relation to policy 8 and the reasons why you're refusing it, you know, as set out, so officers can put that in the refusal and the decision letter.
Thank you for that, James. I think the one point I'm picking up is highway concerns. Another point is overdevelopment, but again, it's quantifying that clearly with the space standards that they're, while accounts met. Is there any other? We've got to make sure that these reasons are robust to refuse it and on material. Does anyone wish to add anything?
If I may, can we not include the concerns over the space standards in terms of, yes, they may, and we can't calculate it because we haven't got the A1 ruler, but can we not state that although they may comply with the space standards, they're not fit for purpose in terms of you can't even get a washing machine in there to be able to look after your own clothing and look after your own hygiene. And that then fits in with the Homes for the Future for Healthy Living. It's not just about the space, it's about people's mental ability. And that's where it becomes a moot point almost, in terms of it becomes a personal opinion, not a factual planning a policy or JCS application. But I think on policy 8 alone, the whole plethora of the remit of policy 8, I think that's enough to be able to refuse it. I don't know if James would agree with that, but there are plenty of things in there. I believe, you know, I appreciate that officers are in between a rock and a hard place because they would like to bring a building back into use within the town centre, but not one that's going to be such a low standard. We'll have the same problem that we did have in another building not very far from there that, you know, had practically windows falling out and not an appropriate fire escape. On 8 years down the line, we're still arguing over it. It's still got flats that aren't fit for purpose. And people are existing in them, and our housing team has to keep moving them along, and we're going to handle it.
There's no amenity space, which policy 8
policy 8 highways, and substantiated
absolutely
argument to confirm the lack of amenity space. James, do you want to just?
No, I just you know, if that's what members feel is lacking with the scheme, then that's going to be set out in the reasons for refusal and your reasons for you know, opposing the development. So officers can take that on board and, you know, put that into the refusal. I think, are you saying that the amenity space is the outdoor amenity space for residents?
Indoor washing areas, my understanding is.
Right, and outdoor.
And possible lack of
outdoor,
lack of outdoor as well, lack of outdoor space.
No place to sit and, well,
lack of parking.
Yeah, lack of parking is
disabled parking, because that car park next door, like Councillor Edwards brought up, is what happens if they build on that, and there's no disabled bays there anyway. And this is the problem we're having in Newland Street now, and we're just going to move the problem along with parking. Although we might not agree with highways all the time, and they can be a pain, but sometimes, you know, we do sometimes have to listen to them because they're the experienced people of the whole of the county, and we've only experienced in our town. And this is what we like Councillor Adams says, we've now come to a level that is enough's enough. We can't keep putting all these people in and expecting them just to be able to use public transport all the time for working. Yes, you can walk into town, but there's very few jobs where you can walk to in Kettering, where you would need a car to get out of the town.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor. So we have reasons on the table with guidance from officers there. Do we have a proposer and seconder for amendment to refuse, not approve the application?
Happy to propose, Chair.
Councillor Edwards and Councillor.
I'll second that, Chair.
Councillor Titcombe. Thank you very much, everyone. So therefore, I'm going to ask Anne to conduct a vote on the recommended or amended recommendation to refuse, not approve the application.
Thank you, Chair. Will you be voting or abstaining?
I don't vote unless it's a tie vote. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Mitchell.
For the amendments.
Councillor Rowley.
For.
Councillor Thurland.
For the amendment.
Councillor Titcombe.
For the amendment.
Councillor Edwards,
For the amendment.
Councillor O'Hara.
For the amendment to refuse, please, Anne.
Councillor Morton, because you weren't present for the whole of the debate, you won't be able to vote. Thank you.
Absolute abstention there. Thank you very much.
So the amendment is therefore carried and the application refused.
Thank you very much. So that application is therefore refused for those reasons we've just discussed, debated there. So that moves us to item 5.3. Our next item, KT 2020-0467, Naseby Hotel, Sheep Street in Kettering. Again, I don't believe there is an update on that. So David is just going to share his screen shortly to commence the presentation.
We do finally, I believe, have the speaker.
Excellent.
Chair, so we shall come to him momentarily. We good?
Thank you very much for that, David. That looks good to me. So Richard, again, ready when you are.
Thank you very much, Chair. So this is the application at the former Naseby Hotel, Sheep Street in Kettering. It's a full application for the redevelopment and change of use of the hotel to a multi-occupancy accommodation comprising of 46 rooms, gym, lounge areas, coffee bar, meeting and workspace areas, and a use class A3 to restaurant area with parking, landscaping and associated works. So this is the location plan and site you'll be familiar with there to the western side of Sheep Street and the south of George Street. The former hotel, George Hotel, obviously changed its name to the Naseby Hotel. As is covered in the officer report, it's been vacant since March 2016. There was the approval a couple of years ago for the redevelopment of a large proportion of the site to provide 29 apartments, and that application's valid for about another year. Permission's valid for about another year, but to date, obviously, that hasn't been taken forward, and this proposal has come forward in that meantime. Next slide, please. So in comparison to that previous scheme that's covered in the report, so this is a scheme that's looking to more to redevelop what's existing there, which in many ways can be considered to be a positive of this scheme in comparison to the previous scheme. So this is the northern elevation of the site. At the top of the screen, yeah, you've got your proposed elevation and the bottom the existing elevation. As you can see there, an introduction of some windows, particularly the ground floor, placing more sort of shopfront type windows. Key change on this elevation is the sort of central element of the building, and you can see where there's the writing above the building on the top diagram. What they're proposing to do is remove the sort of painted render that's in a sort of poor state of repair from that building, and we understand, and the applicant's led to believe that there's the ashlar, so the stone brickwork underneath, and that will be revealed through this permission, and that's obviously conditioned asset in the report. So that's thought to be a positive of this scheme in revealing that sort of historic built form of that element of the building. Obviously, some parts of the building date back to the 1700s. Next slide, please. So this is the Sheep Street elevation. Again, you can see the changes, obviously reducing the number of entrance points into the building itself, the removal of the sign and some introduction of some windows, but essentially a consistent build form from what people know and understand the Naseby Hotel to be, obviously in its historic form. Next slide, please. So this is the west elevation. So this is looking from the sort of oak tree court residential development to the west, sort of looking back in towards the site. So you've got the significant wall there. The key sort of point of interest there is sort of in the middle of the diagram. You'll see at the bottom the existing diagram. You can see the roof of the assembly hall, so the main hall of the hotel. That would be removed, as you see on the proposed elevation at the top of that slide, that would be removed. An internal courtyard is created in its space with some redevelopment at ground floor to provide additional accommodation. So that's the key sort of physical change to the building itself. Next slide, please. So this is looking from the south. So this is looking at the main entrance to the former hotel, and then what would propose to be the main entrance to this proposal. So from that sort of internal car park, sort of courtyard area itself, and there you can see the sort of the changes to the sort of fenestrations, the openings and the windows, but the built form retained in it largely in its existing form. Next slide, please. So this is the existing ground floor plan that you can see at the top of that diagram. That's the assembly hall, that large area, and that's where you'll see the key change as we move on to the next slide, please. So you can see there, you've got the internal courtyard there, and then obviously to the north of that, or west, sorry, getting the orientation wrong, the west of that internal courtyard is that built form to create the additional rooms at ground floor. So that's the actual redevelopment that's going on there. And then if I talk you around the rest of the proposal, so in the sort of a pinky colour at the bottom of that diagram, that's the A3, so that's the restaurant use, which is obviously in the heart of the town centre, caused with the restaurant quarter and obviously in where it's located. To the left of that, we've got a lounge area and a bar coffee area for the residents. Just to the north of that lounge coffee area, there's meeting rooms and co-worker facilities, so workstations. And then behind that restaurant and sort of meeting room area and sort of centre of that diagram, we've got the gym at ground floor for the residents themselves. And then to the left of the lounge area, you can just see there's the concierge element there, which I'll touch on because that's an important part of the proposal. I'll touch on that later on in the report. Next slide, please. So this is just looking at the internal courtyard. So that's the top left slide is looking from the courtyard, looking west towards Oak Tree Court. The top right is looking back towards the sort of parish church and the back of the buildings fronting Sheep Street. I'll show you on the photograph, but that's got quite an interesting sort of stone elevation, which will obviously be revealed a bit by removing that existing assembly hall and its roof. And then obviously sort of limited changes to the north and south at the bottom of that diagram. Next slide, please. So this is the first floor plan showing the individual rooms. It's important to touch on obviously the nature of this proposal. It's covered in some detail in the report, but it's a co-living proposal. So it's rooms with ensuite facilities, rooms to space to undertake work or study or those sorts of things within the internal rooms, but obviously shared kitchen and dining facilities. So 6 kitchens and dining sort of areas across the 46 rooms. But then obviously those shared facilities at the ground floor. Next slide, please. So this is just the top floor plan. You can see the rooms themselves, and then sort of on the right hand side of that diagram, you can see one at sort of midway on that right hand element, you can see the kitchen dining area on that particular floor. Next slide, please. So this is the sort of access and amenity area. So you've got the 4 parking spaces and 1 disabled parking space there. They're sort of central in that sort of picture, utilising the existing access to the hotel and the historic access to the hotel. To the north of that car park, we've got the first sort of green block. It's very difficult to see on that slide, but the single sort of green block is the bin storage area for the restaurants, so for the A3 use. And then the larger area of green squares and black squares is the bin provision for the residents themselves. We've got just to the right of the car park, that's a cycle parking for the restaurant. And then to the left of the parking spaces there, we've got the large 2-tiered cycle storage. So the main area of cycle storage for the residents. And then to the left of that, some Sheffield cycle hoops, so more space again to store securely bikes for those residents within the proposal. Now, one of the questions on the previous scheme was about those parking spaces and whether there was any sort of allocation proposed for individual, what would be rooms in this proposal, what were obviously apartments previously, and there hasn't been any talk of that at the moment, but I'll touch on the co-living management plan, and that's an element that could be picked up within that co-living management plan, which would be secured through a Section 106 agreement, so it's a legally binding document, which would be very important for the future success of the scheme should it be approved. Next slide, please. So this is the Sheep Street elevation of the building. Looking at obviously the parking provision, there are obviously those short stay spaces outside the front of the building for drop-offs and short stay provision. You see, obviously, as building, people are very familiar with a building of some quality, within the town centre, which is obviously seek to be retained through this scheme. Next slide, please. So that's the corner element. That was an element which, through the extant permission, was to be revised significantly, but has obviously just been sort of redeveloped through this proposal. The hotel sign would obviously be removed. Next slide, please. And so there, we've got the George Street elevation there, and obviously in the sort of mid-ground there, you can see the white rendered element of the building where the sort of ashlar stonework would be revealed, and that's secured by condition as set out in the officer report. It's recommended, it's come to committee the site as it's covered in the agenda because of that need for the Section 106. There is a comment about parking, sort of a comment from one of the neighbours at the neighbouring residential property. But as you can see on this, it doesn't come out too well, but on George Street itself here, it's double yellow lined. So there was concern about, again, about parking and access for emergency vehicles basically to that neighbouring residential unit, but there's no parking on George Street in itself, so there won't be any blockage or any sort of issues for those neighbouring residents from impediment of George Street itself. Next slide, please. So this is obviously the access point from that car park into Sheep Street itself. And that's obviously the entrance point on the right hand side there, just in the shadow. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is obviously the car park provision itself. So the 5 spaces overall, obviously, as I mentioned, and then obviously the area to the rear, which would provide the bin storage. Next slide, please. And that's looking south down the car park where those significant areas of cycle storage would be provided. Next slide, please. So this is looking from internally within the hotel, and this is showing that sort of stone elevation, which will be revealed partly from the removal of the assembly hall roof, which is on the left of that diagram. As is covered in the report, obviously the assembly hall, has its historical importance, and through comment from the archaeological team at the County Council, a recording condition has been recommended to ensure that the importance of that element of the building is recorded and kept on record for future generations. Next slide, please. So this is the Oak Street. This is the neighbouring property at neighbouring residences to the left and the west of the site at Oak Tree Court, and you see the difference in levels between that car park and the building itself to the left. Next slide, please. So that's again looking from sort of just the entrance to that Oak Tree Court car park. You can see there the roof of the assembly hall. In many ways, as is covered by the report, the removal of that roof and the new built form in that area at ground floor will actually provide a betterment to those neighbours. It'll be lower and it'll be also hidden by that existing wall. Next slide, please. So again, I'll touch on the sort of heads of terms and the sort of contributions that have been looked at. So there's contribution towards libraries. Again, there's looking at contribution towards some of the initiatives identified within the town centre delivery plan, which obviously form part of the area action plan. Again, this cycle voucher initiative and mega rider ticket. This is for the first occupier of each room in this instance. And then sort of a key important element of the proposal, which is the co-living management plan, which would guide how the unit is managed and occupied. You'll see in the report, we've had comments from the housing strategy team, sort of worked in partnership with them to understand the nature of the proposal. These co-living schemes are popular in America, we understand, and are becoming popular in bigger cities. And this is the first, obviously, this type of accommodation in this area. So we've obviously sort of sense check the details and the significant amount of documentation that the applicants provided, sort of sense check, you know, what's been said, using the expertise of our housing strategy team. As you will see in the report, they are obviously quite complimentary about the scheme, can understand its merits and what it's seeking to achieve. One of the key things is obviously what has been described in the documentation so far about the sort of the initial drafts of the management plan. It's about this proposal for a full-time living concierge who would live on the ground floor, and they would be the first port of call for sort of issues and day-to-day management of the site, including obviously managing the bin provision, ensuring that the refuse is stored correctly and that is presented on the correct days, etc. But also linking through to obviously restrictions, I mean, obviously within the tenancy agreements and those sorts of things, which would really seek to ensure that obviously that the site is managed in an appropriate manner so that there aren't any issues arising from the nature of the development in the future. And that's obviously going to be one of the key elements within the Section 106 agreement. We're fully anticipating that will be produced in coordination with colleagues from the housing strategy team, because obviously their input and importance and knowledge on these sorts of matters. Next slide, please. So yeah, so that's the final slide. So I'm just taking you back there to the floor plan. Just briefly go through the report just to check I've covered everything that I wanted to. So I've covered about the recording condition, about that assembly hall. That's set out in condition 7 of the report. There's been some comments made by the police about crime. You'll see that there's a condition set out at condition 11 of the report to ensure that a crime prevention scheme is secured prior to first occupation of development. There was an issue raised about potential access between the first and third floors, and those sort of internal matters could be addressed through that condition. The condition 12 is talking about obviously revealing those ashlar elevations, which have sort of historical importance and produce some betterment from this scheme. And then there's the condition 16 itself, which is the one talking about the refuse and cycling provision. So overall, in comparison to, like I said, the previous scheme, officers considered that this is a better scheme. It's an innovative scheme, something that hasn't been tried in this area before. With that, obviously, guidance from colleagues in housing strategy, we obviously see the merits of it, subject to obviously securing those details through the Section 106 agreement and ultimately having those details as part of a legally binding document. But as you'll see, officers recommending the scheme for approval subject to conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Richard. So we'll just wait for David to clear the screen there. There we go. And we do have one speaker on this item. We have Matt Humphreys, who's the agent for the applicant. He'll be joining us now by video. Just wait for him to get connected there. He's just connecting to audio, so if him just bears with us. Well, there we go. Just waiting for him to connect to his audio.
Mr. Humphreys, can you hear us?
Good evening, Mr. Humphreys. Can you hear us? Oh.
Mr. Humphreys, can you hear us? You're muted, sir. You need to unmute. There we
Hello,
go.
sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there we go. Thank you for your
Sorry
patience.
about that.
You've got 3 minutes to
Very
address
much.
the committee whenever you're ready.
Just-
Oh, you'll need to pause your YouTube stream because otherwise you'll get me in your ear. Are you ready? You've got 3 minutes.
Yes, I think so.
Good to go when you are, so you've got 3 minutes.
Right, okay. Thank you. I'll assume that everyone can hear me. My name's Matt Humphreys. I'm the agent for the applicant. I think the main things to sort of pick up on, obviously the presentation has covered the sort of general principle. We had previously obtained consent for 29 flats at the site, which required quite a lot of demolition in the conservation area. Having gone through the detailed work, the viability of that scheme just is not viable, unfortunately, otherwise it would have come forward. So we looked again with the applicant at a co-living scheme. Now the advantages of that is that it predominantly retains the vast majority of the building, and which is inherently more sustainable. And although it's an older building, the hotel, which obviously moved out a few years ago now, 3 or 4 years ago, so it's been vacant since then. The hotel basically had been refurbished to a pretty good standard. It was a 3-star hotel just before it went into administration. And some of the rooms in there, I mean, they range in sizes, but some of the larger ones are about 41 square meters. So they're good quality. They all have en suites. They all have sort of work desks and nice spacious facilities. Obviously, the co-living concept is relatively new. It's becoming more popular in London. This is something that would be classed as a very small type of facility. Some of them are sort of 400 or 500 units. And the key with any sort of co-living or residential or quasi-residential scheme is to ensure that the management is there, and that's why we have the on-site concierge. The idea with co-living is to create a intentional community, and we find that they're generally very popular with sort of people between sort of 21 and 30, and it's really that stopgap between maybe university and maybe buying your first flat or something. So it's very, very popular in that demographic, and it's great as well if you're moving to a new area such as Kettering for work. Maybe you don't know many people, and it's actually sort of cheaper because it's all inclusive. In addition, it has that flexibility. You may move to an area such as Kettering just for a one-off project on a job for say 3 months or 6 months. So I think that's some of the key benefits. I think the only thing I would like to touch on as well.
Sorry to interrupt you there. So
10 seconds.
3 minutes. So if you could sum up, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think the only point I'd like to make, obviously, these are very tough times, and in no way would we, sort of want to encourage, COVID issues with people being all lumped in one building. I would very much hope that, in about 18 months' time, which is pretty much the minimum time frame which we could get a building like this ready, that there'd be some sort of cure. But obviously, these are uncharted times. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Humphreys, for your contribution there. David's going to put you back in the waiting, and the meeting will continue on YouTube.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, David, there. Okay, so we've got Councillor Edwards to start the member debate, please.
Thank you. Part of this I actually quite like, and I do think it is quite innovative. but I just think it's in the wrong area. I just don't think that it is something that is needed or suited, you know, in a relatively small market town like Kettering. I mean, the gentleman said that it's very popular in London, and I can perhaps see that's why. You work during the week and maybe then go somewhere else at the weekend, and I can see it being well used there, and maybe well used as student accommodation as well. Parking is the huge issue here. I can't believe that it's recommended that we should have 57 car parking spaces and we are offering 4. That must be some sort of record for any planning application. There is nowhere else for them to park around there, except the front, the front spaces, which are short stay car parking, which a lot of those businesses along there, the hairdressers, the delicatessens and the other restaurants rely on those. So all you're going to do is push it into the area actually that I represent, kind of the Headlands area, which has its own problems at the moment with the train station parking, and that's just going to continue. I just think it's ludicrous that we're even considering something that only has 3 car parking spaces and 1 disabled parking space. Can you just imagine the fights that are going to break out because if somebody's parked there for 7 days because they've gone on holiday and somebody can't else park there? It's just ludicrous. So I'm sorry, I'm totally against it.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Does an officer wish to respond on Councillor Edwards' points regarding parking? Or
yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, just to reference, obviously the previous and the extant permission on the site was for the 29 apartments, and I don't have the plan in front of me, but obviously that was using the same car parking area, so it wouldn't have had, I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but it wouldn't have had significantly more car parking spaces, and that was approved at the committee a couple of years ago. So just as a bit of context, obviously, this site, as I mentioned during the presentation, is constrained. It's a town centre site with that small car parking area, albeit in comparison to that previous scheme. Obviously, there is some provision there. Obviously, take on board the comments about potential for management issues, but hopefully, they could form part of the co-living management plan that would be secured through the 106. But obviously, there is some provision here. The hotel could open this evening, tomorrow, with that same car parking provision. That's the historic provision. These are potentially aimed, as the applicant has said, at sort of younger residents. They're primarily obviously single occupancy. So there would be potentially a number of those that wouldn't need the private car. And obviously anybody looking around the site would be fully aware that there's only that small car park and a maximum of 5 car parking spaces, of which 1 is a disabled parking space. Just obviously talk about the county council's parking standards, and sort of reiterating points from the previous presentation, but obviously we haven't adopted those as an authority. They are sort of prescriptive and, look at internal floor areas or numbers and just stick them into a spreadsheet and come out with a number. Obviously they can be used to inform discussions, but on individual cases, we have to assess the case on its individual merits. Obviously this is a town centre site, literally a stone's throw from the town centre and the market square. And it's not beyond the realms of possibility to understand or appreciate that some of those residents may not need access to private motor cars themselves, but we're very close in this site in particular to the train station. Some might be working out of the town, so obviously take on board those comments, but yes, it's something that was considered previously, and I think obviously the officers noted within the committee report itself, and again I don't have the report in front of me, but I believe that the Highways Authority didn't object to the previous scheme. Just as a bit of context. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that, Richard there, and Councillor Thurland, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think we acknowledged, I didn't realise it was the same applicant who we'd approved the previous application, because it's acknowledged on page 75 about the previous scheme that hasn't gone forward, but obviously that's not a planning consideration, and I don't think we mean to have to agree to just anything, just to fill the void.
Emma, Councillor Emma, I believe, wishes to clarify.
Yeah, just Councillor Thurland. What they can do without any further permissions is a material consideration.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate.
So it is something that we do have to take into account when we look at this application.
Okay, right. Thanks, Emma. Thank you. So, and then we've gone from 52 rooms, which was withdrawn, I've realised, and to 46, with a slight, you know, just 6 different is not very filling me with confidence, I have to say. In fact, we don't know actually how many people will be accommodated on the site, because it says, page 113 says a maximum occupancy of 90 persons, excluding the on-site concierge team and other co-living staff. So we're not sure, I'm not sure what the fire officer, if they've made any report on this and for fire safety. And I realise that's for building control, but it would have been nice to have seen something. And we're going to talk about the standard of living in homes. And I'm not going to talk about measurements, because again, you can't measure, and I appreciate what James said about this is really difficult. But on page 84, the officer says, is under the impact of future occupiers' amenity, mentions the room sizes from 17 square metres to 41 square metres. And as I said, it's difficult to accurately measure those, so I won't mention that. But on the application itself, in item 57 on the website, there is a schedule of accommodation which shows the allocation of units and the square meterage, which is here, and I've printed it off. And let me just tell you how many. There's 2 at 15 square metres, 2 at 16, 7 at 17, then a few more in between. And we talked about the rooms that are 41 square metres. According to this schedule, there's 1 of those, but there are some at 15 square metres. So I'm not sure which is correct, whether it's the schedule that was put in with the application or what's in the officer's report. And again, does this type of accommodation not fall within any minimum space standards? And there doesn't seem to be any storage space. And then just going back to the plans, on page 101 of our report, it shows the laundry room. But if you go to, on the website, number 19 on that application, it's the same areas designated as lockers. So I'm not sure whether something of this size would be able to accommodate both the laundry room and the lockers, nor can I see how many number and types of appliances are going to be in there for 90 odd people. 6 kitchens, I think, have been allocated, which means a possible of 15 people at any one time trying to cook their meals. And talking about storage, where are their own personal cooking and eating utensils going to be stored? I do agree with the last paragraph where it says the concept may be somewhat romanticised. I've seen the management plan, and the photo montage on 105 looks quite inviting, but I don't believe that any of the rooms would be big enough to accommodate what's on the picture on the left, second one down, that's got 2 double beds, a dining set, 2 easy chairs, a coffee table, etc., etc. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Councillor Thurland. Richard, again, did you want to respond?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and touch on some of those points if I can. Obviously, yeah, they're talking about obviously the evolution of the scheme. It's covered in the start of the report, but just to be clear, yeah, there was initially a pre-app on the site which was talking about 59 rooms. Then there was then the scheme that came forward, which was withdrawn, as the councillor referenced, which was for the 52 rooms, and obviously this scheme that's come before us this evening for the 46 rooms. That's primarily, and it's related to obviously the councillor's concerns about room sizes. Those previous schemes, particularly the one that was withdrawn, Obviously, our officers could understand and could see the merits of the scheme, but obviously I had concerns about the density of the proposal and what that meant for the individual rooms. And so that's why we didn't feel that we were able to support those previous proposals. Well, obviously one was a pre-app, but particularly the 52 room one, we weren't able to support that. And that's therefore the reason that that previous scheme was withdrawn, because of officers' concerns about the density. And it's hopeful.
Sorry, Richard, this schedule is actually for the 46 rooms.
Yeah, that schedule, I'm not familiar with it myself. Obviously, the officer would have been through the report and, measured like the previous scheme, would have measured some of the rooms.
Oh yeah, no, I appreciate that. But one of the points under the amenity where we're saying this is really good, it talks about rooms being from 17 square meters to 41. Well, actually, they're not, because there are some at 15. That's...
Yeah, on page 80 of the report, it says, yeah, it references obviously that smallest being 17 and the largest at 41, but does then go on to say that obviously the average is 23. So the average is at the smaller end of that threshold. So that gives obviously the indication that yes, there aren't that significant number of the very large rooms. They're more, obviously being the previous hotel, they're more at the sort of smaller sort of standard room size. Just to touch on obviously the space standards, that's covered in page 84 of the agenda. Because of the nature of this as shared accommodation, it doesn't fall within any sort of space standards, because obviously you've got your individual rooms with your ensuite, but then you've got obviously your shared dining and kitchen facilities. So that's the space standards just don't apply to something of this nature. The government doesn't intend them to apply to these sorts of schemes. So therefore, it's just down to sort of obviously officers and those looking at the schemes come to a view about whether those individual rooms, which is obviously all they are in this proposal, whether those individual rooms provide sufficient space for normal living. And obviously the officers have made the assessment on, obviously in this case, that they do, together with obviously those which are on some of the floors, particularly the ground floor, quite significant spaces for obviously the kitchens and the dining areas. Obviously touching on the sort of the lockers and the sort of space for storage or whatever, we wouldn't have got down to that detail through the planning application. But if we use the example, and I'm not saying this is the same, but if we use the example of student accommodation, it's not uncommon for residents to have particular cupboards within those kitchens to be allocated, and there's no reason to believe why those sort of initiatives couldn't come forward in this sort of scheme, albeit I haven't had those, make clear I haven't had those discussions with the applicant.
So the same area is annotated differently. One's got lockers, showing the lockers, and the other one's got the laundry. So I'm not sure which is...
On which plan was that? Because I just got a question mark, I didn't catch the reference, sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, number, what did I say? It was number 19, I think, on the application, ground, I think it was 19, on ground floor. Yeah, on page 101 on our plan, it says laundry room, but on number 19 of the plans, it's got lockers. I was just wondering, is it going to be the laundry room? Because that's a real big selling point of this, including where you can wash and dry your clothes.
I don't know what the number 19 is on the website.
No,
Sorry,
I only saw this at 4 o'clock this afternoon.
Yeah.
I'm really sorry to...
No, that's okay. I don't want to obviously mislead committee. It may be that that's a previous revision to the scheme. Obviously, the report, the plan that's been included within the agenda, I believe it's the same one in the PowerPoint. I don't know if Dave wants to just load that up just to check we've got the same plan, but this is obviously the latest version that the officer so we can
see whether it was laundry or
no in the file. It's obviously the one that we consider is the latest version of the ground floor plan.
Oh, it says laundry
plan.
Right.
Yeah.
Is that the right?
It says laundry. Yeah, I can see that.
That's the latest. Yeah, that's the latest version. But we could always double check that before any decision was issued, just to double check that they're. That is the correct reference of a plan. But yes, that's the latest version that we're working to.
Yes, I'm not sure where the lockers would go. Thank you. Yeah, I can see what you've done now. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor. So we do have 5 people wishing to speak. So I'm going to call you in your order according to your raised hand. Can I just ask people to avoid making points that have already been made, just to keep the debate focused, so we can sort of keep things moving forward where possible. So I'm going to call Councillor O'Hara, please.
Thank you, Chair. I kind of echo what's been said already. I appreciate what Richard was saying about the national space standards. They don't apply because essentially this is just really a hotel with shared facilities that's going to be converted into, the rooms are going to just be used as rooms, but not called a hotel any longer. That's what it seems to be. The hotel was updated, so you know, it is in quite a reasonable condition. My concern is that the 6 kitchens that they've got, and you know, whether there's going to be lockers there or whatever for food, is how you know, a concierge can expect to look after and have an agreement in place that would allow those shared facilities to function in such a small town. That really I can't understand. But what I wanted to know is, do we know how long a tenancy will be for? Because, you know, it's almost like this is like student accommodation, not for somebody who's working in the city. And, you know, I could imagine it working somewhere like Richmond or somewhere in London or close to the city. But I couldn't see it working here. What would the rent cover? You know, if there's a gym there, does that mean that they can get they must get the use of the gym included in that rental charge? And would it mean that we could, you know, it just seems like it's going to be somewhere that's a short-term rental kind of facility to help people out of a problem, stepping stone to go and get your own home. Because if you had your own home, you'd have your own space and be able to cook in living space and clean in your own living space. And in a world that, you know, let's face it, we've been living with SARS, and this is essentially SARS 2 for 10 years, and this has just escalated and got worse. And I just think that to have so many people in such small accommodation and cramped accommodation without really any amenity is just asking for trouble. I don't see the fact that, you know, that doesn't give people the scope to be able to actually visit or commute to see anybody, because there's nowhere to park a car. You can't rely on public transport in this area because there just isn't enough of it. There isn't the frequency. We don't live in a city where you can just jump on a train or grab a bus, because there just isn't the frequency. So the 106 agreement, I don't think will help. And if it's the same scheme as the previous one we've just discussed, there's only £100 per tenant if you've got a room that is big enough to have 2 people in it. I guess it'll just be £100 for the room, so to speak. So, you know, I just don't think it's suitable. It's not fit for purpose, and especially not for this area. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Richard, do you want to respond?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've not seen. I'm not sure whether that's information been provided, but I'm not aware of a minimum tenancy agreement length. But obviously, that's something that could potentially be included as part of that co-living management plan. Talking about the rent, it's covered in the officer report, but the rent is a sort of a fully inclusive price. So you pay one price and you get all your services and facilities within that price, and that's one of the sort of key differentiators of this to sort of more, you know, other offers that are more readily available within a town, such as HMOs and those sorts of things. Obviously, take on board the comments about, you know, the concerns about the scheme to sort of counter some of the points. Obviously, we do have to provide for the full range of housing mix and, you know, all different ages and abilities of residents to afford different housing provision. And it's, you know, councillors need to come to a view about, you know, whether this can form, you know, a different, as we've all said, an innovative part of that mix of within the sort of housing supply, offer something different that's not here already. But I'll leave that for obviously members to debate.
Thank you for that, Richard. Emma, did I see your hand go up there?
Yeah, I don't know whether you've had a look at the draft co-living management plan, which would obviously, if this went through, would be attached to the section 106 agreement. So we would have that sort of set in stone. But I think this is where how the communal areas, etc., are managed would find the certainty, because we would attach it to a 106 agreement. We've had the draft co-living management plan, but there might be other things, if members thought it appropriate, that would be added to this. There's clearly a market for these sort of offerings, because we've seen enough HMOs go through this committee to know that clearly there is a need for this type of accommodation, but clearly this is something different which will be much more closely managed in terms of, they're talking about on-street car parking and ensuring that there is no on-street car parking, and tenants would be evicted if they breached any of that. So it's about offering a certain type of accommodation, but being able to perhaps manage it slightly more closely to ensure that it did offer suitable accommodation for particular needs and didn't affect the surrounding area.
Thanks for clarifying there.
Just
Councillor Adams, please. I'll call you again shortly, Councillor. It's just Councillor Adams has been waiting quite a while.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So I've just got a load of comments really that I'm going to make here. On page 74, the very last sentence, that intrigues me. The immediate application has come forward in a way that broadly accords with advice. So I found that a very interesting sentence there, and that it's proceeded with 46 rooms. My next thing is yeah, it is a very interesting concept, but I think, like other colleagues have said, it does immediately strike of student accommodation. But taking into account that it is an interesting concept, I wonder with the parking, and I think I have raised this before, maybe as a borough, we need to look at some interesting concepts for overcoming our parking, in that we know that we have these issues with town centres and the soaking, when do we say that the town centre car parks are full? So maybe we need to start looking and sort of encouraging some different concepts, different types of concept, and look at edge of town parking and then cycling from the edge of town. Just some random thoughts there. 41 rooms is what that hotel could be and could reopen, I think I'm right in saying, tonight, because I think one of the officers has said that as well. And that could be high turnover of people for very short stays of time and visiting the town, and I would say definitely going to be in cars. So that becomes a bit of an issue then when you've already got something there that can create identical issues with parking. I am a little bit disappointed with the way that the applicants done an average floor space, because I think that's very, very unfair, because the average floor space per room sounds quite reasonable. But when you, again, like Councillor Thurland said, when you actually look at how many rooms are very tiny, and they're even described that they can hold a space for a desk, a worktop, and could accommodate a comfortable chair while still enabling ease of manoeuvring around the bed. But then on top of that, if you look at page 119 of the rules and regulations that could go along with these, tenants are responsible for keeping their individual rooms clean, tidy, and in good condition. I'm not sure where you would be storing any cleaning utensils in those very small rooms. And my last point is on page 85, the second paragraph, the ground floor occupiers could experience some degree of privacy infringement, particularly those directly facing the communal outside space. But I don't see anything really that is overcoming that. So all it then says is the nature of this type of use, however, involves the creation of a community rather than simply consisting of apartments, and therefore a closer relationship between occupiers is to be expected. So I'm not sure what sort of relationship you're going to have if you've got your privacy being infringed. So there's lots of things in here that I just don't think for Kettering, you know, we don't have a high student, as far as I'm aware, we don't have a high student population. And I'm just not sure of the size of this, but I also understand the difficulties of voting against it in the fact that it could reopen as a hotel tomorrow.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Richard, did you wish to comment on any of those points there?
Probably just about obviously the privacy infringement. Obviously, yeah, obviously there would be obviously those ones, particularly those ones on the ground floor, that new development where the assembly hall is to be removed and that internal courtyard. It's in that area that obviously those concerns are raised, because obviously you would have potentially having a number of residents passing by, you know, your windows, as in a similar way you would potentially if you're in a hotel, you know, and you're on a ground floor room, or if you're potentially living in a busy terrace street, you have that, you will have that privacy infringement, because you will have potentially a number of residents passing by your window at any given day or any given time. Taking that on board, though, obviously, you know, overall officers don't consider that any one of those sort of rooms or proposals is significantly infringed enough to, you know, make the whole scheme unacceptable. But obviously, yes, there will the certain rooms will have, you know, as is apparently within normal housing, so certain properties or certain rooms will have better levels of amenities than others. But obviously, that will be apparent to people when they're looking around those rooms, should permission be granted.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Mitchell, please.
Yeah, thank you. A lot of what I wanted to say has been said by other people. I concur with I have concerns. It states that it's being aimed at young professionals, and I don't feel I can go happily say anymore without saying that in the future, and looking at this, these rooms are small, and home working in the future is going to become a massive thing for people. Now, to have a room that has got a potential chair, a workstation and a bed, there will be no home work balance and in there. Now, I appreciate that in the proposal, it states that there will be shared workspaces and a meeting room, but on the same page as that, it states that there is going to be room cleaning provided. But as Councillor Adams has already stated herself as well, on another page, a few pages in the co-living agreement, it states that the residents have to clean the rooms themselves. So there's inconsistencies there, and I say a lot of what I was going to say has been already said, so I don't want to go over it. But for me, it's the fact that in the future COVID society and the way that working is going to be going ahead in future, rooms of this size won't offer a happy home life balance and a work life balance. And I struggle with this one a lot. I don't think I can approve this one. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor. Again, Richard, did you wish to comment?
Yeah, obviously the council obviously touched it, but I don't know if David, sorry David, if you can just pull up the plan, that ground floor plan again, just to obviously demonstrate that there is that area for the meeting room. There's an area for sort of hot desking facilities within that sort of ground floor proposal. So I can't point, not help. So where to the left of the gym is the meeting. The gym, you see the gym just to the rear of the retail units, or sort of centrally within the building. There's the gym area in the middle of the building. To the left of that, so to the south of that, is a meeting room, and then to the left stroke south of that again is the co-worker space. So there's actually like benches and hot desks provided there, because that's obviously part of the driver for this, that it allows people, should they wish to work or have a meeting, that those facilities are available within the accommodation itself. Obviously, being the former hotel, obviously, like we said, there will be a conversion of a number of the rooms, and obviously a number of those would have had desks in them where, you know, people would have, not necessarily for obviously weeks or months on end, but people would have worked from those desks obviously for periods of time. But that's that provision on the ground floor is aimed at sort of facilitating that sort of home working or sort of hot desking sort of need should it arise, obviously, in the future. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Richard.
Chair, given the amount of hands that we currently have up,
yeah,
and there's nothing currently on the table, we might want to be mindful of time.
Thank you very much.
We're heading towards the 2 hour.
Beat me to it, yes. So I've got Councillor Titcombe, Councillor Morton to make their points. Then I'm going to call quickly Councillor O'Hara and Councillor Thurland to make a quick follow-up. And then really we want to look forward to move this forward. So Councillor Titcombe, please, have your say.
Thank you, Chair. Try to be quick. To the point, bins for the restaurant parked on top of Northampton Road for collection. That's a very steep road, and these are the larger bins, not our wheelie bins. I know they have brakes, but I have concerns about that. And where will the bins for the residents be parked for collection? I imagine there'll be larger ones as well. And at the front, I presume, street furniture will need a licence, which has been in the application here, 2 metre space. I seem to remember we chopped a bit of the pathway off there some years ago to allow a bit of parking and also a pickup spot. So I think parking for the public use of restaurant. People tend to go in a car to a restaurant these days. So it's a bit ambitious, perhaps over ambitious, I think. But that's all. Just a few bits there I would like, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Morton, please.
I agree with a lot of points that all my fellow councillors have made. I find it amazing they say 90 people on 46 rooms. Now, it's all about size here. Funny enough, I'm in a hotel room tonight, and there seems to be more room in this hotel room than a lot of these hotels there. These are hotel rooms. They are not places where people can live. By granting that, we have the potential for all sorts of trouble with people getting annoyed. I mean, I look at a room there that's supposed to have 2 people in, and one, there's no refrigerator. You couldn't put that in. You couldn't. There's not enough storage for the people. You couldn't have work from home because then you've also got to store computers. My little room here is already full with my computer and my 2 little suitcases. Where am I going to put a suitcase? Refrigerator. Okay. So is there enough room kitchens to put 6 refrigerators, or however many people are going to have to share? Because they're all probably going to, you know what happens with sharing rooms like students. It is not designed for living. And I'm sure the Northamptonshire Core Spatial Strategy calls for sustainable developments. I don't see how this is sustainable. People just couldn't live in it for any amount of time. It's like you're asking somebody to live in a hotel room here for possibly months. They're not going to be able to do it. They will be, they can't even sit properly. How are you going to put 2 armchairs in there, a desk, and anything else that you need storage for stuff? Because it isn't you coming here for one night in there. You're coming there for potentially quite a long time. There just isn't the space there. It's a nightmare. I couldn't put my name to it. And I've never seen so many councillors with ifs. The whole thing is iffy. So I'm sorry, I can't support it.
Thanks, Councillor. Richard, did you wish to respond on Councillor Titcombe or Morton's points there?
Yeah, I'll try and be brief, Chair. Obviously, the residence bins, obviously, they could be presented to Northampton Road, or more likely would be presented to Sheep Street. I think it would be envisaged, obviously, through that management plan that they would be presented to the road, obviously, by the concierge, and that's part of, obviously, the benefit of having those concierge service provided as part of the scheme. On the sort of storage, obviously, the residents would have a degree of storage that they would need within the rooms. I'll take that on board. Obviously, talking about the kitchen for storage, obviously, I don't want to get the plans back up again, but you'll see on the ground floor plan in particular that some of the kitchen and dining areas are significantly large. We're not talking about tiny, small kitchens here. We're talking about, large kitchens with. So if you look at, for example, there's one of the kitchens behind on the right hand side of the diagram there. You'll see there's directly behind the restaurant. There's a kitchen, and a lounge dining area. There you've got 2 tables with 12 seats, some occasional chairs, and the kitchen area. So we're not talking, they're not all that size, as I showed on obviously on the upper floors, but we're not talking about small areas for these kitchens. So there would be adequate room for residents to store, you know, most of their sort of provisions for their sort of day-to-day, week-to-week needs. Again, at the top left of that picture, there's another kitchen, a dining area. So I just wanted to sort of give it a bit of an impression of the sort of size of the kitchens themselves, albeit that obviously residents would have their storage needs for their own belongings within their rooms. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Richard. So I'm going to call Councillor O'Hara and Councillor Thurland to make 2 very quick follow-up points, and then I'm going to move this to the vote. So Councillor O'Hara, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly, it was just touching on what Richard said earlier, if I may. Well, I'd say thank you to Sean and to Richard, to be honest, Sean for the report and Richard for presenting this, because I think it's a difficult thing to present and put together when it's you get so many questions off us. But my concern really is that we've got what potentially could be students or young people moving in there, and the police have got concerns for, you know, people being able to access. And if you do have like a swipe system, so like they can go from 1 to 3, floor 1 to floor 3, without any impediment. If you had a swipe system, then my concern is then that swipe system quite frequently breaks down. I worked in a school and it frequently used to fail. You have maglock doors on them, sorry. But then you also have the issue with fire safety and things like that. And I kind of know the building, and to me, I just don't think it's a safe place to put anybody. It's different when it's a hotel. Everybody follows like sheep and does what they're supposed to do. But in a real situation, when they're people's homes, even though they're only small rooms, it's a very different panic situation where they want to grab something that's important to them, even if it's only a small room. And I think that's a big concern for me. And I think we're back to policy 8 homes fit for the future, to be honest. Thank you.
Councillor and Councillor Thurland to conclude.
Yeah. But picking up on Councillor Adams, when it was a hotel before, I haven't heard of any problem with parking when it was in a hotel. But Emma, if I could ask you, on page 114, you were talking about putting that phrase in under the 106 monies about that if they parked on street, they would be evicted. Now, obviously, that's not a legal binding thing because anybody can park on the street. If that happened and they were evicted, would then the Borough Council be entitled to have to rehouse them because we'd have somebody on the street and homeless? I'm really concerned that we can put it in a 106, but I'm not too sure that anybody would sign up to something that was legally binding, that if you put somebody out on the street because they've got a car, which effectively we would, where does that leave us as an authority?
Thank you. Emma.
I think it's an interesting point. I think that obviously one of the reasons behind the co-living plan is to try and make sure that you could create a community and deal with some of the issues. And you've obviously got a living concierge there who would be managing and organising meetings for residents once a month to try and deal with these issues. Now, whether or not they would be made, you know, are they making themselves intentionally homeless by not living in accordance with their tenancy agreement? Well, we would probably say that yes, they had been making themselves intentionally homeless. Now, obviously, we don't want to talk in detail about our
policy.
Yeah, in terms of what our duties are as a housing authority. But I think it's just trying to deal with some of the issues that might arise. But obviously, we still have the point that we do have to take into account what they can do without any further planning permissions, which is the
with the apartment. Oh yeah. But they look, I appreciate that, they look really nice. But if you go down to the nth degree out of 90, and we don't know exactly how many can be in there, and the concierge, I presume, would, if she's living in or he's living in there, then they would want somewhere to park. But if you had a full complement with 4 car parks, you've got the potential of 84, 86 people with a car and nowhere to park, and then suddenly, and I'm not saying everybody, but those 86, if they haven't got a car, have got to find a job or go on public transport to get work. And in London, that would be perfect, be wonderful. But in Kettering, I really don't think that those numbers really fit into what we can offer anybody. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Yeah,
Colleagues,
think-
we sorry, we are at 8 o'clock. Is everyone happy just to hopefully very quickly proceed to conclude the thing?
Yeah.
Thank you. Emma.
I'm just going to make the point that obviously we're not really, what we're looking at here is whether this is acceptable in planning terms and whether it accords with policy, taking into account all material considerations. So some of it is not about exactly what we would like to see here. It's really about whether we think it accords with our adopted planning policies.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Raleigh, just one very quick final point from you, and then we really do need to move to the vote.
Thank you, Chair. Listen to what everyone said. Fully agree with what Councillor Edwards said. It is the scheme itself I quite like, but it's in the wrong location. We haven't got, as the speaker said, we haven't got really companies that people can easily get to for a project without using a car. They're going to 20 to 30-year-olds. They're going to be using vehicles or students even to get to the nearest university, which is Northampton. They're either going to catch the bus and sit there for an hour, or they're going to have cars. The mentioned about the courtyard area, if there's a lot of noise from there, it's going to affect 11 of the rooms, and the sound is just going to echo up through the courtyard to all the rooms. The kitchens are on average 33 square meters, catering for 15 people. There's not the storage for food, utensils, anything like my daughter's students' flats. There's just not the space for it. We've mentioned before about it being a hotel, and the previous application that was approved. The hotel, I'd envisage most people would have come on the train anyway. If they're visiting Kettering, they've either driven or come on the train, and they won't be using the vehicles that much, I wouldn't have thought, as a hotel. The previous application we approved was for living accommodation, so they would have been more permanent, and therefore would know when they moved in that there was no parking and would live their lives accordingly. These are for, I see them as fairly short-term rentals that people are coming in to do a project of work and then going away again. They'll use cars. So I can't, as much as I'd like it, it's in the wrong location. It won't work, I don't think, in Kettering, and therefore I'll be against it.
Okay, thank you. So that really does conclude quite a robust, detailed debate there. So we have nothing on the table. We do have obviously a recommendation to approve, and obviously everyone needs to be mindful of the history of the application, certainly with regard to parking, and obviously the point that's been made if it was to come back into use as a hotel again. So Councillor Raleigh.
Yeah, can I propose an objection then based on the lack of amenity space for the residents, lack of parking? Yeah, that's it.
Can I second that?
Chair.
Okay, officers, guidance please on whether we need to make that more robust in terms of reasons for refusal.
Does it not go against the core spatial strategy?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So you've obviously commented about the amenity space and the lack of parking provision. It's obviously whether you wanted to touch on any of the other elements, which would be sort of amenity aspects or other aspects that may be captured of this
lack of
policy 8.
Lack of personal living space. You only spend a certain amount of time in a communal area. You have to live a lot of the time in your apartment or in your little hotel room. Now, there's not enough personal living space in there. People are not going to spend 8 hours a day on their day off in a kitchen. So they need the space in those rooms if you want it to be residential. And it's not residential, it's more for hotel use or similar thing. And I don't think the space is significant in those rooms to be able to let people, if they didn't want to go down there.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor. James, do we have any policy that would support that materially?
Well, I'm not sure, and Richard might be able to advise in terms of previous HMO schemes, but it's significantly similar to an HMO in relation to the process that you have a room where, you know, and you have facilities for toileting and washing and so forth, but primarily the rest of your existence is shared facilities with cohabitees. So I don't know whether or not these proposals are any less than previous HMOs that we've consented. You know, I don't have that in front of me, whether or not, you know, what members have been saying in terms of the average space of the rooms, 21 square metres, and some at the lower end, 15 to 17 square metres is what we would typically be, you know, consenting for HMOs. I mean, in this situation, it's much bigger than a typical, you know, 6 or 8 HMO. I don't know, Richard, if you've got sort of any knowledge or, you know, kind of experience on that, but you know, it would be difficult to argue that on that basis. I think if we're doing similar consents for multiple occupation houses, which is slightly different from this, but in theory quite similar.
Chair, Richard, before you, James, can I just say that, but we haven't got a definitive number of people who are going to be in this, so we're not. With an HMO, we normally have a minimum, or sorry, a maximum who can go in there. At the moment, we don't have a maximum people because it's 90 plus whoever's going to be helping the concierge and the living staff. So we can't. I don't believe we can agree something that we don't know what the end result is. And this, if you're talking about this as an HMO. That's different from what this co-living plan is. Now, are we calling it an HMO? Because then I think rules and regulations would be different than if it was this co-opted living.
No, I'm not saying that it is an HMO. It's a different concept, and that's the difficulty, that we haven't got a policy in relation to this new form of property tenure and you know, development, which is coming through the country over the next, or has been over the last, you know, 3 or 4 years. And I think, you know, this authority will probably find that there are more, and it may not be the only place that this is being tried in Northamptonshire. I just went on the website, and there's a place called Co-Living Spaces, and they're popping up in, you know, Brighton and Hove and other sort of smaller towns, stroke cities. You know, it probably does lend itself to, you know, a more urban, larger city format, where there are more urban professionals who, you know, have jobs that they can walk to and so on and so forth. But it's not to say that it couldn't work in a location like Kettering. And I appreciate that you've got concerns in relation to some of these, and members will have concerns, you know, for typical, you know, standard HMOs in relation to the impacts that they have. I think it's hard for officers to assess and to, you know, put a recommendation forward on the basis of trying to do this without further guidance, you know, within a local planning policy.
Yeah, I appreciate that, James.
I think you've got to make a decision based on what you feel, you know, the reasons for refusal will be, and the impacts that, you know, are going against our policy, albeit that that's not perfect, because it doesn't kind of incorporate this type of living and this new property called tenure.
Thank you, Jim. So I've heard parking, I've heard overdevelopment, policy 8,
amenity
space
for the living.
If we can support that with policy that exists.
Home working as well, the home working issue.
Chair, can we include the thing that, I know there was a report done from Manchester, because it's a big university place, and they had a thing whereby, I think it was 2019, it's called Homes Not Assets. they were looking at all these aspects, you know, that has to be a required living space, a required living standard as agreed by your local planning authority, which clearly is us. And the think tank, yeah, so the policy 8 of the JCS would apply again, I think. Don't know if James would agree, Richard.
Okay, I think we're really exhausting the list of reasons. So, Richard, did you want to add a final point there, and before we move to voting the amendment?
No, obviously members have talked about some of the elements of policy 8. Obviously, those ones that touch about the sort of all encapsulated about the amenity of the future occupiers, aren't they? So it's amenity of future occupiers, and those ones are relating around sort of highways and parking.
Okay, if everyone's satisfied that I feel like we've exhausted the list of material things that can be evidenced and dependent on policy that exists. Okay, so if everyone's happy, I'm going to ask Anne to conduct a vote on the amendment to refuse, not approve the application for those reasons discussed.
Have we got? Do you want to propose a chair?
We already had one. I believe it was Councillor Rowley and Councillor Mitchell from memory.
Right, now we are voting for the amendment to refuse the application. So if you can indicate for, against or not voting. Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Mitchell.
For the amendment.
Councillor Morton.
For the amendment.
Councillor Rowley.
For.
Councillor Thurland.
For.
Councillor Titcombe.
For the amendment.
Councillor Edwards.
For the amendment.
Councillor O'Hara.
For the amendment to refuse, please, Anne. Thank you.
Yeah. That application is refused, Chair.
Thank you very much for that vote. That and the application is therefore refused. So that concludes our business this evening. Thank you to officers and members of the public watching us on YouTube for everyone's their contributions this evening.